What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
Today, we are going to be talking about three, we're keeping it to three this time, three news topics that were interesting. And then, but our main topic is going to be talking about multi-dimensional characters. What makes a multi-dimensional character? Is it always important to make sure that your main character is a multi-dimensional character, or what's called a three-dimensional character? Mm-hmm. And then we have, of course, our community stories, some really cool stuff from the community we want to share with you guys. So, some of the most interesting news from this week, PlayStation, Sony announced that PlayStation will not have any sort of presence at E3 in 2019. At all. It's the first time in like the 24 year history of the show that PlayStation has not had a presence there. It's freaking crazy. Here's the statement from Sony on it. It says, as the industry evolves, Sony Interactive Entertainment continues to look for inventive opportunities to engage the community. PlayStation fans mean the world to us, and we always want to innovate, think differently, and experiment with new ways to delight gamers. As a result, we have decided not to participate in E3 in 2019. We are exploring new and familiar ways to engage our community in 2019, and can't wait to share our plans with you.
This is a big hit for E3, honestly.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, I mean, you kind of just have to speculate on the reasons why, but I mean, obviously they don't. Okay, here's the next part of the statement. This actually clarifies it somewhat. Now that we have Spider-Man out the door, we're looking down in 2019 to games like Dreams and Days Gone, but we wouldn't have enough to bring people all together in some location in North America to have that event. We don't want to set expectations really high and then not deliver on it. So they're basically saying we don't have enough PlayStation 4 games to show to like make it worth it. So this means one of two things. One, I don't know. there's because there's still like Death Stranding. There's still potentially the Final Fantasy VII remake, which Nomura recently said is still going just fine.
He says it's going well.
So if it's that those games aren't coming in 2019 and those games are coming more in 2020, that could be the reason. They're just like, we don't have enough stuff coming. Or it could mean that there's a heavy focus now moving ahead to the PlayStation 5. But even still, they've never missed an E3 in the past, even in years where it's like the focus is switching now to our next generation console, whether that's a PlayStation 2 or 3 or whatever.
You always have stuff that you want to show. Like, they're always working on new things.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. It's almost like Nintendo's direct approach is probably going to start catching on a lot more places.
I think so, too, just because it's far less expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like Nintendo has a presence at E3 still. They still have their demos and they'll do interviews and stuff, but they don't like present live on stage. They don't like build stages out at E3 really anymore. And they kind of just do their videos, right? Which it makes the most sense to me. You can completely control the messaging. You can control the production value. Like, there's nothing that can go wrong with releasing a video later that you made versus being on the stage. Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't blame Sony for going that route, or anyone else for not doing like live presentations anymore, if that's the direction they're going. But I mean, just missing the thing altogether, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't understand it unless they really just have nothing at all,
which is
coming in 2019.
Problem for them.
Yeah.
It means the PS5 launched a year too late. If they have nothing in 2019, they didn't plan well.
I don't know, but in tandem to this, moving on to our next, well, it's kind of in the same topic. There's another report I was looking at that was saying that the dev kits for the PS5, there's some rumors spreading around
Yeah.
that some of them are out in the wild, that they're really powerful, but that they're not due until 2020. So that would suggest the PS5 is still a little ways out, like at least till 2021, maybe something like that. This article is saying it's all kicking off. Sony has shocked us by announcing that it's not attending E3 2019 after all, and it's resulted in a slew of speculation about PlayStation 5, what's going on behind the scenes. Based on conversations I've had with the developers across the industry, the Japanese giant's next generation console is not set to release. Well, okay, so the actual release of the console will be 2020.
Yeah.
So they'd be missing 2019 and not even like, because usually when they announce a new console, they would do it. No, they don't always do it at E3. Sometimes they don't, but they announce it the year beforehand, and at E3 that year, they sort of like hype it up a bit if it's going to be released in the next year. So if it is coming out 2020, I don't know why they wouldn't go to E3 and show what it is.
Especially if everyone knows it's coming out in 2020.
I know. Of course, this has not been confirmed. This is just a rumor, but however, one Redditor reckons that PS5's development kits are already in the hands of studios, and it's beast, apparently. This is supported by a separate Square Enix story where an artist at Luminous Productions accidentally revealed that the team is working on a new IP. So that was on LinkedIn, I think. In his like portfolio on LinkedIn, he listed a bunch of stuff he worked on at Square Enix, and one of them was the Luminous Studios' next AAA PlayStation 5 game is something he listed. They didn't give the name of the game, just said PlayStation 5 AAA game. Anyways, so seems pretty likely that the PlayStation 5 is on the way, and I don't know if it's had any effect at all on this decision not to do, not to have a presence. I mean, it's not even just not like having a presentation. They're not going to have demos. They're not going to have
of
any presence at E3 at all. And wow, okay. I don't get it.
It's a trade show. Even so, this is a funny thing. Even when all the big announcements come at E3, the Tokyo Game Show, which happens a month or two later, they're still there. You don't have to have big announcements to be there and to have a presence and to advertise your stuff and to try and get people to come and try out new things coming to your console. I mean, the fact that they don't have anything new to say shouldn't exclude them from going to, or preclude, I guess, them from going to any trade shows. It just doesn't really make sense to me. So I wonder where this decision came from.
There were a lot of games they showed, right, that are not out yet, because they talked about, well, now Spider-Man's out the door. But what about like Ghosts of Tsushima? When was that supposed to come out? Like, what was the release date supposed to be for that? Is that before E3? I don't even know if they've put a release date on that yet.
Yeah, I can't remember seeing a release date, but maybe somebody else knows.
And what about Last of Us Part 2? Does that have a release date before? Come on, what's the release date? I should have looked this up beforehand, but I didn't think about it. June 11th. That might be like...
That's like the week of E3.
That's like the week of E3. You want to have that. You want to have that there to show it off. You want people to demo that. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's like at that point, all the marketing dollars are spent. Games on sale. We're done spending money on this game. I don't know. Anyways, but that's the week of. I would think you'd want to have that there for people to demo.
Yeah, you think so.
Also, Death Stranding, which should be getting pretty close to being finished at this point. This year, maybe, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they've ever had a date for that game, but anyways, I think there are more games than the ones they mentioned in that article that they could have at the show and let people demo and stuff without having to do a huge presentation. I don't know. I find it strange, but we'll see what they do.
Yeah.
Okay.
PlayStation, dude.
Our next topic here, Devil May Cry is getting an animated series. It's coming to Netflix.
And it's the same company that did Castlevania, right?
Correct. Same producer of the Castlevania series on Netflix is doing
Yeah.
Devil May Cry. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this, because, I mean, it's interesting in and of itself. Last week I talked about how I liked the Castlevania Netflix series, how I was surprised at like some of the really good storytelling that they did with that particular intellectual property. It kind of surprised me a little bit how they were able to actually effectively move me emotionally in some way. So, you know, it's cool that these same people are taking Devil May Cry. I think that's an even harder one to... Well, you could still make it a really cool action thing, though, right? If it's just strictly focused on being like an awesome action series or something like that. But even still, there's a quote here from Shankar, who is the
producer.
Producer.
Yeah.
So he says he acquired the rights so that Hollywood doesn't F it up. Then the writer of the article speculates it's not clear if this is a reference to the creative liberties that Hollywood studios have taken with other Capcom franchises like Resident Evil and Monster Hunter. Have you seen the set photos and stuff for Monster Hunter?
Monster Hunter, I have not, no.
Oh my, it looks so dumb, dude. It's like military. What? It's like straight like tanks and like...
That's not Monster
GIs.
Hunter.
I know. GIs and tanks and stuff like fighting monsters. That's
so
what they did.
It's all modern and stuff. Oh, that's stupid.
That's what they did with Monster Hunter. That's what this guy's referring to on Polygon. So yeah, he bought the rights to Devil May Cry so that Hollywood wouldn't F it up is apparently his reasoning behind it, which is cool. I like that. I respect that.
Screwed up himself.
I respect that because he did a really great job with Castlevania. So
yeah.
Anyways, look forward to that. There's also speculation that, I'm not sure if this is speculation or not, but I've heard or seen people saying that this is going to be like a multiverse thing. So like Castlevania and Devil May Cry happening in the same universe, right? Like they're tied together, like the Avengers and all the freaking superheroes and stuff.
That would be interesting, but that would be a way of him, you know, screwing things up for his own purposes.
it could work because in the Castlevania series they did, I mean, it's basically demons and stuff being summoned by Dracula to like terrorize and kill people. And Dante is a demon slayer. Now, Dante is in the modern world and Castlevania happens like more in medieval times. So
I'll just make him part of the same timeline.
Yeah, it's like the Dracula of the modern day that he has to fight. Or maybe not Dracula at all. Maybe it's just demons. I don't know. But anyways, I think there is a way to make it work. But it's cool. We'll see what happens. I like Devil May Cry, all right? I think it's pretty cool. The games are pretty cool anyway.
Yeah, you know, I've never really played them before. I've seen them played, and I've seen trailers and stuff, but I've never played a Devil May Cry before.
They're fun. They're fun to play. They're not super deep from a storytelling perspective, but they are fun to play.
Well, it's a lot of freedom for the storytellers then to kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, last news topic. Moving on to George R.R. Martin, the author of the Songs of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones series. So he has it's just a small statement, but it's one that I hadn't really thought of, which is why I wanted to bring it up. He was asked about how progress on the Winds of Winter is coming. Winds of Winter is the next book in the series that he's been writing for freaking years now. He says, I've been struggling with it for a few years. The Winds of Winter is not so much a novel as a dozen novels, each with a different protagonist, each having a different cast of supporting players and antagonists and allies and lovers around them, and all of these weaving together in an extremely complex fashion. So it's very, very challenging. Fire and Blood, by contrast, which is kind of like I think that was like a poor man's Silmarillion for this world kind of a deal. It's like a book that sort of like details like the ancient history and lore of the world. Fire and Blood, by contrast, was very simple. Not that it's easy. It still took me years to put together, but it's easier. And like that's so true. Like I hadn't really thought of it that way because a lot of people are like, dude, just write it. Dude, just write it. And it's like he's not just writing a single novel with any of these books anymore. It
Yeah.
really is like he's writing 4 or 5. If you follow all the different characters who are in separate places right now, kind of like following different storylines, and that he's trying to bring them all together here toward the end. That's crazy. That's a lot of characters, a lot of
Yeah.
main characters. It's thinking of it like different, like a bunch of different novels really kind of put together into one it gives me more sympathy for how long it takes.
Yeah. And I think he has a lot more pressure on him now than he ever used to at any other point in his career to finish like this one book,
Hmm.
because like the show was coming
Yeah.
coming up to an end, and like this happens. I did not think it would happen with Game of Thrones, but he's not done, and the show's done. So
Yeah,
like,
dude.
what's gonna happen? It's crazy.
Pretty sure the final season of the show is going to be debuting in April,
Yeah.
2019. So the show will be long over by the time that this book comes out. And what I
Yeah.
hope happens is kind of like what happened with uh Full Metal Alchemist, right?
Oh yeah.
Where
They'll make like a new.
the show
Hmm.
passed the writer, and
Yeah.
she kind of just said like finish it however you want to, but she didn't like tell them what her planned ending was.
Right.
And so they effed it up, and the ending of the original show was really bad as soon as it diverged away from her
Hmm.
story. And then she came back after having finished the manga, and she finished it a different way, which I think is really smart. Because you don't want to finish it the same way, because then there's no surprise for the reader, right? So I hope that George Martin, despite the fact that it has been stated that the only reason he agreed to have these
It's because they
showrunners
knew how it would
is
end.
because they understood the ending, right?
Yeah.
So I still hope that he will diverge from that and write a different ending, so that the people who read the books will still have some element of surprise and get like a different take on the story. I think that's how he should go.
Hmm.
But in any case, I think the show itself has kind of gone off the rails a bit ever since diverging from the original material. It's the storytelling has struggled to
Well,
captivate me. There's a lot of weird decisions that have been made, I believe.
that
So
makes sense. That would happen.
it's still done at a high production value. It's still, I mean, it's not like it's garbage or it's horrible. I think that there are some really dumb choices that have been made. And I think that it's really fallen into mediocrity
Hmm.
away from when it was really great back in like season 3. But in any case, I could sympathize with him, and I hope that he goes a different route with his ending.
Yeah. That would be
Okay.
really cool.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump into our main topic today. So we wanted to talk about multi-dimensional characters. What makes a
Yeah.
multi-dimensional character, right? So I'll start it off by just like we could just read the definition of what it is and then just like call it a day. But I want to diverge from there and kind of
Done.
talk about how people talk about multi-dimensional characters, and you'd think that you should always have one as your main protagonist and whatnot. But I've learned some interesting stuff that I want to share with you guys. But let's do that first. Let's just talk about what it is. So a multi-dimensional character is a character having or involving or marked by several dimensions or aspects. Now, to get a little more into that, a two-dimensional character or a flat character is lacking the expected range or depth, not designed to give an illusion of depth. So the 2D and 3D characters are drawn from, 2D or 3D with the different dimensions of height and then length and then depth, right? So
Yeah,
a 2D
depth. That's
character.
what people mean when they say depth.
Yeah, so they're saying that a character lacks depth when they're saying it's a 2D character, right? Whereas a 3-dimensional character has a lot of depth or a lot of different aspects to their character that make them up. Robert McKee, who I will never stop quoting because I freaking love him, he says here, In film, we talk about three-dimensional characters. Tony Soprano, in my analysis, is a 12-dimensional character. Walter White is a 16-dimensional character. If you sit there, if you sit there for 10 hours watching dimension after dimension, contradiction after contradiction emerge out of the character, you see how he treats his wife one way, then how he treats his friend another way, then he treats his enemy yet another way. These brilliant cast designs of these great long-form series pull out consistent, contradictory dimensions. That's what dimension is, a consistent contradiction within the nature of a character. After 10 hours, you've learned more about what it is to be a human being, than you could have ever in your life experienced during a feature film. So his sort of like take on it is these contradictions in a person's character, right? You could say, maybe even on a more basic level, the faults of a character, the way that they'll have maybe a certain philosophy or morality, but then they'll divert from that,
and they'll do something else.
They'll act in a different way. So that's one way to look at it. I thought that was kind of interesting. Did you come across anything that you were looking at this week?
I think we found the exact same article, by the way, because I have that exact quote in front of me. But so what we do is me and Mike will pick a topic, and we'll like diverge, or we'll both look into it separately, and we'll kind of come back with what we've got. Now I've got a few thoughts on like what a dimensional character is, like three-dimensional, and also just like what a dynamic character is, because I think there's actually a little bit of a difference, because dynamics you can look at in a 2D sense, kind of like what Mike was saying. You have your graph, your chart, and dynamics would be like how high the chart goes or the wavelength goes, and then also how low it goes, right? But it doesn't factor in depth at all. So the more dynamics you have that go in slightly different ways, then you have actual three-dimensional depth, right? So your character may have an internal contradiction, and that gives him some dynamics, or gives the story dynamic. But it doesn't mean that the character is necessarily three-dimensional unless there are multiple different dynamic areas. So like what I've read about in one article here was talking about the past, present, and future. That's a whole set of dynamics that you can bring in, who they were in the past, who they are now, and where they're headed, or what they could be, or where they're going in the future. An easy, normal life doesn't really doesn't really give much by the way of dynamics in terms of the character's development. But somebody who has really, been through a lot in their childhood, now they're a teenager and they're having these adversities, but they have hope for the future because of what these adversities are going to teach them into adulthood. And I think that's one section of dynamics. Then you also have, just the general morality. You have, the relationship with the character and other people. You have relationship with the characters in the plot. You have what they're good at. Like you can have dynamics and skills, right? This guy's really kind of not smart in the head, but he's really good at fixing stuff, right? And so he's got his own area of expertise that you maybe wouldn't expect. That leads to maybe a more dynamic character. Anything that you see in real life when you meet people, and you can tell that maybe they haven't always been the way they are now, right? They haven't always made the best choices, or maybe when they were a teenager they did this or that. Sometimes it's more obvious than others, but the more you get to know people in real life, the more you realize what their faults may have been at different points. The more dynamics you can calculate within that person, and the more multidimensional they become. That's kind of the theory that I've been working on.
So Chris Guin says something interesting here that I think will lead into the next part of the conversation. I want to take this. He says, It bothers me when people assume multidimensional means not boring. It's not true. And I think that this is the general way people look at it. When you look at people criticizing a character, they'll say, oh, that character's boring. They're one-dimensional or two-dimensional. They don't have any depth to them. And there is a stigma around this idea that your character needs to be multidimensional to be an interesting character. Now, you just brought up dynamics being one way that you could take a two-dimensional character and make them more interesting. But I'm going to be referencing a book called Creating Character Arcs by K.M. Weiland. It's really, really good. She does a really great job of breaking this down. And if anybody wants to pick up that book, I totally recommend it. It's freaking fantastic. But in her book, she talks about kind of the three different character arcs. There is a positive change arc, which is the most common one. So a character goes through a positive change and at the end of the story has changed for the better.
Yeah, they're a better person, yeah.
Then you have the negative change arc. This is something more like The Godfather or Children of Huron, for instance. Characters go through major changes, but it's for the worse. Then you have a flat character arc, which is actually more common than the negative change arc. Now, you'll see this in movies like Back to the Future. You'll see this in movies like, what is Katniss Everdeen from? Hunger Games?
Oh, Hunger Games, yeah.
Where your main character doesn't change really at all from beginning to end. Now, here's the important thing. These characters are still interesting, and people still love them as main characters, but they have a flat arc. Paddington is another example. The 3D movie, The Little Bear.
Yeah, well, that's the highest rated Rotten Tomatoes film ever made. By the way.
And I was watching a video from, let me give you the channel name, Just Right, who was talking about that exact thing. This is the highest rated, freaking, especially considering how many reviews it has.
Hundreds and hundreds, yeah.
Like, and it's still 100%, right?
100%.
So.
Like 500.
But it has a flat character arc, though. So he's saying, why do people love the character Paddington? Why do they love Marty McFly when they don't, and they're not multidimensional characters like at all? And so here's what K.M. Weiland says about that, right? In a positive change arc, the important structure behind this is that the character starts off in their story world believing a lie. So they believe something that isn't true, and there are impact characters, is what she calls them, that come in and sort of like help the character change their mind through the story. And then they learn that the lie they believe in isn't true. They accept the truth, and then they make a positive change. Right? Another example of this is, what's that Pixar movie about the different emotions?
Oh, Inside Out.
Yeah, Inside Out, right? Joy, I think, is the main character.
Yeah.
In that, and like she's convinced by an impact character, Sadness, that joy is not the most important or only valuable emotion that there is, right? And she goes through a major change during the course of that story and learns to accept the truth, right? That there are a wide range of emotions that are important. In Back to the Future, a great example of this is, well, okay, so before I go into that, so the difference is that in the positive change arc, there are impact characters that come in and change our main character away from the lie. But in a flat character arc, the ones that are really effective, the main character is the impact character who goes and changes the opinions or the behavioral patterns or whatever of supporting characters who believe the lie. And the main character is the only one who believes the truth. And the story world needs to be convinced of the lie. Right? Yeah. So Marty McFly's dad is a coward. We see that at the beginning of the movie in 1985. And Biff is still like, bullying him into his like adulthood and everything like that. And it's like ruining their entire family life because his dad can't stand up for himself. So Marty, who knows the truth, and George, who believes the lie, he goes back in time and teaches his dad how to stand up for himself and affects change in the past and then comes back. So Marty, the flat character, who is still interesting, was the impact character. And in flat character arcs, you can still have a great, really, really cool, really likable, dynamic, like you're saying, main character who's very interesting, but does not have any sort of like major change and is not necessarily a 3D character, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating.
That's
It's
absolutely fascinating.
it opens up just like an entire extra like realm of things that you can do with a story. It just like helps you
Right.
focus. It's like, because a while ago, I was trying to come up with character arcs for all of the characters I'm writing in this novel that I'm writing. And I was like, I got to make them all like super interesting. And I've got to like make sure that they believe this lie, and then they're going to change to this, and they're all going to have this like wide affecting change. And each one of them are going to go through something grueling. And I was trying to like give all this depth to like every character in the story.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not where you start. Where you start is, am I doing a flat arc, or am I doing a positive change or a negative change? And then that informs you entirely of what the character's role is in the story. So it's completely fine to have a character have a flat arc, as long as they're going to be an impact character. They believe the truth, and they're going to go help other people realize. And it's just like, dude, like, it just opens so many doors. It's like
That's
there's so many
huge.
different things you could do. It's so cool.
Well, and the character that I typically think of when you talk about an impact character, this is just the most archetypal example I can think of, but it's Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, even with the prequels, Obi-Wan Kenobi, like, I'm not saying those were great films or anything, but it's just that he doesn't really change. He's the guy. He's just the guy, and he doesn't really try to, he's never tempted by evil. His emotional connections, we know nothing about his love life or any. It's just he's a Jedi, so I guess he's just a perfect Jedi, right? He's perfect, and he's an awesome character though. And you just think about it. What if the story was focusing on Obi-Wan Kenobi and not Luke Skywalker, and he'd be the impact character, but the people that are around him, they're the ones that would, like Han Solo and Luke and even Leia, like they're the ones that'll start to change and become different people.
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan Kenobi's the solid one. But you brought up the Katniss Everdeen. That's insanely fascinating, because you're right. From beginning to end, she actually does not undergo these crazy changes, because she had a sucky life at the beginning. Her life really sucked in the middle, and it still sucked in the end. And there's no, like, that's just how it is. But those stories absolutely captivated me. Yeah. And everything around her and the world, like, there were dynamics elsewhere that I want to say that made up for it, but there was nothing to make up for, because that's just how the story was. But that made other characters, seem a little more interesting. But she was plenty fascinating.
Yeah. And what's up, Steve, by the way, says watch Clone Wars TV. I saw a couple episodes of that, and I will say I was shocked by how much depth they gave to just the clone troopers in the first episode. I'll maybe talk about this in more detail another time, because it'll be a little bit of a divergence from what we're talking about. But yes, when we're referencing Obi-Wan, we're just referencing his role in the first movie. In the first movie, he was an impact flat character, and imagining the movie being written from Obi-Wan Kenobi's perspective, it could still work. Like, and I find it fascinating that the same could be true for Back to the Future. You could write Back to the Future from the perspective of George McFly.
Yeah.
And it would be a positive change arc, and it could totally work. And Marty could just be essentially the wise character that appears out of nowhere from the future and comes to, like, give him courage and help him, like, better his life. And it would still work. The story would still work. It was just changed to a positive change arc versus a flat character arc, written from Marty's perspective.
Lego Dog brings up a really interesting point. He says most silent protagonists do this. When I think about silent protagonists, I mean, first off, I think of Wall-E, like basically every time. And yeah, Wall-E has this much character development from the beginning to the end of the film, right? He is what he is. He's a little robot. He's adorable. But video games specifically have tons of silent protagonists. And you can think of them as being flat characters, because they're, when you think about it, with Link from Legend of Zelda, or with a lot of characters from basically any silent protagonist where you're projecting yourself onto the character, they aren't dynamic, like, in any way. And you still connect with them, but the storytellers have to go to a different place. They have to rely on different means to get you to connect with this character. They just can't rely on the dynamic, I'm emotionally attached to this person because we've been through the highs and lows together. You can't count on that with this character. You have to do that elsewhere. But you can do other things that make you connected with that character. One of them being it does everything you tell it to do, and it's kind of you to some extent.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we got some good. I gotta respond to some of this stuff here.
yeah,
So Nitram says, how would you define Ned Stark in those parameters? He seems to fill all of them in one way or another. Now, this goes into a little bit of what Riker's Beard is going to get into in a minute. By the way, I love the name Riker's Beard. That's freaking awesome. So Ned Stark, I would define leaning, like there's a spectrum to this. I don't think that you have to be either completely flat or, like complicated enough to be considered a 3D character. You could, like Kaysen's saying, there could be dynamics to a 2D character. So you can add some complexity and I would personally say that Ned Stark fits under a dynamic 2D character because he doesn't really ever change his mind, and that's why he, spoiler alert, for anyone who does not know this, spoiler alert, I'll give you just a second to mute it for like 20 seconds. This is why Ned Stark is killed, is because he's stubborn in his like morality, right? He will not change to adapt or survive in the world
despite what he's been through.
Yeah. So he's a complicated character in that he has a history, he has reasons behind why he is the way he is, and he's believable in the sense that he's complex, he's dynamic, but he doesn't experience any kind of arc, really. He kind of he insists on staying the same. And in this story world, you can't survive that way. You've got to use some level of deceit to deceive the people who are deceiving you and be a step ahead of them, right? So he is an impact character, I would say, in that sense, in that he goes into King's Landing and becomes the first the hand of the king, and just starts freaking like making all kinds of decisions that are impacting people on a wide scale. And that's why the Lannisters obviously conspire against him and everything like that. Well, because he finds out the truth behind what's been going on with the Queen. So, anyways, moving on to Riker's Beard here. I feel that like flat arc characters still need to be flawed in some way. Otherwise, they're just your typical Mary Gary stew with no flaws. Yeah, so that's what Kaysen's saying with dynamics, right? You can still have a flat character, but have it be a dynamic character. A character who is strong in this area, weak in this area, right?
And then I thought of other there's the emotional dynamics, right? Where they go from happy to sad, like what Mike showed before, or there's physical dynamics. They go from being weak to being really strong. You have to have multiple dynamics in order to create like 3 dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Here's another interesting one from Lego Dog. So in theory, the story does not matter, but the perspective of who you're telling it from. And really, what is a 3D character other than just seeing the character from more perspectives? I wouldn't go as far as to say the story doesn't matter, but the story isn't as important as the characters. That would be my philosophy, yes. I'm not saying that's a universal truth.
I have a thought on that, actually.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a universal truth or that I'm right, but in my opinion, you could have the most fascinating plot and the most fascinating story world ever. But if you don't have characters that people can relate to and that people can learn from their experience and that the theme can be explored through the people, like, it's just not as easy to really grab people. Because we experience life as human beings in a certain way, and we can observe other people going through things, and we can relate to that. We can feel for them. We have this ability of empathy, and storytelling is a practice in empathy. Really, it's learning to get in the shoes of a character, whether it's fictional or real or whatever, and like try to like understand the world from their perspective. So without interesting characters to explore that story through, what's the point? In my opinion, in my philosophy, right?
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I was going to talk about just real life, just generally speaking. You talk about observing other people and how you can observe people going through this or that. And we do this a lot, but basically everyone kind of goes through it. So the flat characters, the impact characters in your life are the people who have likely already gone through, and this is real life. This isn't stories. This is you.
Yeah.
These are the people who have gone through this already. Your parents, your grandparents. These are people who they are going to impact you and the decisions that you make, but they don't often change. Now, this isn't always true. I know many people whose parents have undergone some pretty radical changes, but for the most part, they're the rocks. They're solid, right? This is how the foundation for stories. And so humans have this like child, adolescent, adult, kind of like the three phases of, progression in life. Children are flat. They're flat characters, in part because they just want to have fun and they don't know that much stuff yet. Once you become an adolescent, I actually wrote this down here. This is very interesting. So children are static characters, then they become adolescents and they learn that they can act terribly. They learn that they may have the potential to become like the evil characters from the stories they heard as children. As a kid, you get mad and you hit someone. It doesn't do much damage. When you become a teenager, you realize that you really do have the capacity to do some really, really bad stuff to other people. And the last line here is, as adults, they accept their power to do evil and exercise restraint as they try to live a good life. So the three stages being child, adolescent, which is adversity. This is where all the crap happens that kind of makes you into who you become as an adult. And the way stories are typically crafted, that's a good person as an adult. But sometimes the adolescent experience can lead you to do some things and make some choices that make you a bad person, right? Which would be kind of the other way. What Mike was saying, you kind of ended up in a negative thing by the end of the story arc. That happens too, but most stories end up in the positive direction. But the fact that everyone goes through this, the fact that everybody has been a teenager and has made stupid choices and has literally been an idiot who did dumb things, when you see other people going through that, it's like you're identifying with it yourself. This is why we tell coming of age stories so often. Like most of the big stories that you see, at least like the animated ones, I don't know. I guess a lot of the like Avengers and stuff, they're a bit older. But for the most part, like Spider-Man or Studio Ghibli films or Disney movies, it's usually a coming of age story because that's when the adversity in life happens for most people. Is when you really don't really know who you are or who you want to be. And when you go through those low points, that makes the high points, when you come back to them later, that's what constitutes a dynamic. That is one dynamic. Having this right here, that graph, that's one dynamic. And every human can relate to that because we've all kind of been through it. And so some characters you'll see in their adult stage, they're static, they're impact characters. Some kids you see as children's stage, they're static, but they're not impact characters, and they that's what you might call a boring character or a flat character or something like that. And then there's the people, maybe another third, which is right in the middle. They're the people who are currently going through adversity right now. And those are the ones that most stories focus on. Yeah. But I just kind of wanted to parallel that with our lives because I think that's why these stories have so much of an impact. Why do we need people to go through these awful experiences so that we can become more attached to them? But what I found in my life is that I'm the closest with people that I've gone through hardships with.
Yes.
Like whether my family, friends, or anybody, and even if it's somebody I don't know and I go through something crazy and it's like, holy cow, I can't believe that happened. This has happened many times in my life, especially when I lived away from my family. I lived up in Pittsburgh years ago. And it's like, I'm with people I didn't really know very well. But after going through stuff for a few weeks and after being like, making decisions and like learning about things, you become really close to these people.
It's crazy how fast it happens, really.
Yeah, it is. It could just take a few weeks. And sometimes you butt heads at first and then you realize that, you're not all that different. It's just like a movie, right? It happens all the freaking time. Mm-hmm. But the point is that without that adversity, you don't really get to know somebody. And and when movies avoid showing adversity or avoid having characters actually make bad decisions, it prevents you from getting to know them better. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. That's the importance of a dynamic character, despite the fact that we're saying, hey, not every character has to be dynamic. But if you really want to be really close with a character, I think that is important because that's how it works in your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree with that. Walrus here is saying, honest question, when you're reading a book, do you think of all this stuff or can you just enjoy the story?
50-50.
It's a good question. There are I'll say this. That's how I enjoy stories now. I enjoy them through the process of analyzing them because for me, like I'm not interested in entertainment, right? Because this is something I want to do. This is like where I want to go with my career. I want to be a storyteller. So for me, it's about when I go to see a movie, I'm reading a book, I'm playing a game, I'm trying to find out what did these guys do to like make this work and make it effective, and why is it resonating with people? And that's kind of just my perspective because I want to do it too, right? So that's the reason why I'm in analytical mode all the time, and it's become my way of enjoying storytelling. But that being said, there are still a lot of times where something will be so effective or so good that I just sort of melt into it. Kind of like I was talking about last week. You lose your sensory perception. You literally forget that you're sitting in a chair at the movie theater, that you've got your Coke in your hand or whatever and your popcorn in the other, and that there are people sitting next to you. You're there with your buddies, or you're there with your family or whatever. You literally forget that and you just melt into the screen and into the story. That still happens to me for sure. It happens when I'm reading something really captivating. I forget that I'm lying in my bed with the lamp, on next to me, and that I've got my notes that I'm writing. Like sometimes I'll forget and I'll go, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be taking notes on this, and I'll go back and cover it. But it still happens to me a lot.
Walrus had a follow comment to that. He says, when you read a story, are you just thinking of how the characters are going to change, or just you enjoy the scene? When you're reading, you always read with a fine-tooth comb and look for meaning that might not be there and miss the point that maybe something happens without a larger world-altering theme. Anyways, I may have misread that a little bit, but I think the point is that if you're too analytical, you can maybe miss things a little bit. But my solution to that, because that does happen, it happens all the time. But my solution to that is typically to allow myself to be immersed. But afterwards, when I'm thinking back on something, you have to ask the question, why? You can't just say, oh, this movie was so good, or this book was so good. Oh man, that's great. Movies should be like that all the time, but not think of, well, why was it so great? Why was that so different? Why is Hunger Games different from Spirited Away? Those are completely different movies. But why is Katniss wasn't all that round of a character? Why was that movie so good? Especially the second one. Second one's really good.
Second one is actually the last one I saw, and I liked it a lot.
It's the best one, yeah. But if you're not asking those why questions, that's the time for analysis. And that's the time when you really can have it both ways. You can be in the middle and enjoy a film, and you can just leave and forget about it and go on with your life, or just think about how awesome it was. But if you ask the question why, that's when you can learn to craft these kinds of stories yourself, because you understand how it works. Because stuff just works. Like, it's a good point. I mean, you can just sit and enjoy stuff, and you don't need to know why it works. But if you want to know why it works, this is why, because it's deep, deep ingrained in our human psychology. And I think it's important to want to know why.
That's really interesting. It's just really interesting.
Whether you're telling your own stories or not, it's how humans are. It's how we talk.
You understand people better by becoming a better storyteller. Storytelling is not just about entertainment at all.
Exactly.
Like, we are telling stories constantly. When we're meeting with our buddies, we're catching up over lunch. What are we doing? We're telling stories about what happened
story
to
after
us.
story.
And just like telling, and we often embellish it. We try to make it more exciting, for the people who are listening. We don't even necessarily do that consciously. We just do that because we want to, have a good time with these people and catch up, and you're excited. Beyond that, I mean, you're meeting with your family at dinner. What do they do? How was your day? What happened to you today? They tell their stories. You tell your story. When you're asleep at night, You tell yourself stories through your dreams subconsciously, even when you're not sleeping and you're just bored. You daydream and you run through scenarios in your mind, and you know, there's a lot of like theories out there about dreaming and things like that. Like, what's the purpose? Why do we do it?
Why? Why do humans dream? Yeah.
To prepare ourselves for embarrassing situations, life-threatening situations, where our anxiety increases, we get into fight or flight, or we have to figure something out, and there's pressure, and like experiencing the pressure and being like, what would I do? Even when that just comes to relationships, you know, I think everyone does this, and I've learned that recently, but sometimes you have a problem with someone you're close to, or potentially have a problem, and you think that this might lead to an argument or something like that. And so you'll run through the discussion in your head and all the possible outcomes. What could they say here? How am I going to respond to that? You know, what am I going to say here, here, here? And you practice through daydreaming or just through regular dreaming or whatever. Yeah. And stories are a means for us to practice how we should respond to challenges, problems, and all kinds of things. And it gives us the ability to see it through another person's perspective in fiction, or even if it's nonfiction or whatever. How did they deal with it? Okay, how should I deal with it if that were to happen to me? It's all about preparing yourself, reading patterns like I was talking about last week, right? Because the better you can predict an outcome, the better your chances of survival. I think it all comes back to being biological in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, on the topic of overanalyzing stuff, I just want to show this off real quick. This video came out this week on this channel called Now You See It. It's called The Art of Overanalyzing Movies. You guys should definitely watch this. Here, I'll send it to you as well, Kason, so that you can see it. Definitely check it out. It's a great video. You know, kind of leads off with the question, or not with the question, but the scenario of like an art teacher or an English teacher. You know, the author says something like the curtains were blue. And then the English teacher goes, the blue curtains represent the character's depression and this and that. And then it goes back to the author. What I actually meant was that the curtains are effing blue. You know, there wasn't anything deeper in it than that, right? There's certainly times where we are looking for meaning in things that were never necessarily the author's intention. Now, is that wrong? That's a more difficult question. Whether or not the author intended it, you could still find certain meanings in things. That's completely valid. However, it's when you're looking for meaning in things in such minute details that don't really add anything substantial. It just feels contrived just because, oh, there's a thing I can find meaning in. Oh, there's a pattern I can recognize. Oh, there's a pattern I can recognize. Here's another thing I could pick up. And it doesn't really like add anything substantial to this character's arc. That's when you kind of get into the realm of overanalyzing a bit, right? But that being said, people can still find subjective meaning in things, and that's fine. Like, that's kind of what art's all about.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I'm trying to think. I just wrote some stuff here. There might be one more. Yeah, closest to life, dimensions. Oh, yeah. Talking about consistent contradictions. I think your very first, the very first quote that you read when we kind of started this whole thing, talking about consistent contradictions makes me think a little bit of Harry Potter, actually. And how, well, specifically the fifth book, which is his really like adverse time period, I guess. But having you need to have dynamics, low points, high points. You need to have, you know, strengths and weaknesses and all of that stuff. But they need to make sense. They need to make sense with your character. Your character can't he can't do things that the audience feels like he shouldn't do based on the other information that you've given him in the first place. And you can do that sometimes. There's always, anytime there's a rule, you can break it to great effect sometimes for whatever purposes you may have. But your contradictions need to make sense. Like one of the examples, I think, in the article that that we had looked up, this one right here from the Script Lab, they talk about Ron Swanson in Parks and Recreation or Dwight Schrute in The Office, how they both have this specific, like, this is who they are. They're weirdos, right? So I don't know another word to use for them. But several times throughout the show, you see at least a little bit of why they are the way they are, specifically with like Dwight Schrute or his family. Sometimes you actually have really tender moments with these characters that make sense. It's not that Dwight Schrute became a different person or anything. It's that you were able to see a different side of him that you hadn't really seen before, but that makes sense given the state and the personality that he currently has. That would be like a consistent contradiction. Things happen to people, but the decisions they make need to make sense, even if they're the opposite. There was another example here given what's it called? Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca. This article right here, it's from the Script Lab. They say he is seen saying that he'll stick his neck out for nobody, but then he proceeds to do the exact opposite. But it's a consistent contradiction because all humans understand how men are in love with women and how they act, and how that actually kind of makes sense within the human frame construct that we're viewing this whole thing through.
Sure.
So anyways, that was another kind of side point that I wanted to bring up.
Nice.
It's got to fit the world.
All right. Good stuff.
Yes.
We're going to move on now to wrap up the podcast with our community stories. Show off some cool stuff that you guys have been working on. This first one comes from Modern Erasms, or Erasms, maybe? And let me pull this up here. Make sure I have the right link. Actually, no, wait. There's one more thing I wanted to add to the last topic, too.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay. First of all, I'm not going to play this clip, but I will show you guys the video that you should watch.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You gave me this.
So there's a video here, an interview with Steve Kaplan, classic comedian, brilliant guy, good writer. And he, in this video here, talks about mistakes that writers make when developing their characters. And this, I found this because I was researching how do I was trying to look for a good structure or graph or something for writing a character arc. That's what I was interested in finding. And essentially, I ran into this video, and that's what led me to the graph I'm going to show here in just a second. But what he talked about was that what the best idea is to have the character start with the desire or motivation or something they want, right? And what a lot of writers will do is that they'll in order to prolong the story, because we don't want to write something that ends after 20 minutes. They go after what they want, but then they just throw obstacles at them to stop them from getting it the whole movie, right? And it just goes and here's another thing that gets in the way. Here's another thing that gets in the way. Here's another thing that gets in the way. And his philosophy is that it's far more interesting to have the character go after what they want, but realize somewhere around the midpoint, maybe 2/3 of the way through, whatever, that thing they wanted isn't actually what's right for them.
Right, or it's not what they thought it was, or yeah.
It's not really what they need.
Right.
They thought they needed that, but they didn't really need it. Then they find out what they really need. Then
was
they have
inside
a switch.
Themselves the whole time.
Then they switch and they move and they go in a different direction. You have a character arc that changes, right? So, that sort of led me to this graph that I've been using in my own writing. I really liked it. So at the start of the story, you have the character's attitude, desire, or state of being at the beginning of the story. Then step 1, show the audience that your character needs to change in some way. Also establish that there's something your character wants that conflicts with their need to change. Again, this is mostly going to be used for a positive change arc.
Yes,
so
yes.
You're creating a 3-dimensional character here for a positive change arc. If you're doing a flat arc again, and your character's an impact character, you don't need to do all this. Step 2, an opportunity arises that would allow your character to embark on a journey toward change. Your character might be resistant to the opportunity at first, but they ultimately decide or are forced to take the journey. 3. At first, your character may believe the journey is about getting something they want or achieving something themselves. They are oblivious to their need to change and only focus on getting the thing that they want. Which leads to 4. Your character acts according to their own selfish interests. This lack of concern for their need to change causes the forces in your story to push back against your character, resulting in a confrontation or revelation, which leads to the midway point. Your character, number 5, your character is confronted with their need to change. This sets your character on a new path, and they must ultimately choose between what they want and what they need. Now we're on the back end to the revelation side. Now aware of their need for change, your character will struggle between choosing to act according to what they want or according to what they need. But your character can't struggle forever. This is the next part. At this point, the antagonistic forces in your story rear their ugly head and force your character into definitive action, which leads to 8. Your character makes the clear choice either to remain set in their old ways or to change. That would split this from a positive change arc to a negative change arc, right? They must give up what they originally wanted in the beginning in order to achieve this change. Number 9, now your character must fight to take a stand or to prove that they have truly changed. In the end, they must show your audience the result of the character's choice, be it good, bad, or ugly. And then ultimately you end up with the character's attitude, desire, or state of being at the end of the story being different from the beginning of the story. That is more or less the structure I've been trying to use for the characters that I'm writing in my story. It's a lot of steps. You have to come up with a lot of scenarios in that. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 9 scenarios for every character to demonstrate their change over the course of the story, right? So it can be intense. So keep that in mind if you want to write a really deep 3-dimensional character that experiences change over the course of the story. Or write a flat character arc where your main character already knows the truth, is already good, already knows everything, and goes and tells everybody else they need to change their mind. Yeah. Okay. That's the end of that.
All right.
Now let's move into the community stories. Again, first one here. Let me see. Let me pull this up because I want to read his description of what this is. This one comes from Modern Erasmus. He says, I am the author for the SCP Foundation Wiki. Basically, it's a huge and high-quality collaborative fiction project in the new weird genre. Y'all would probably enjoy SCP in general, honestly, as it's home to tons of fantastic short stories with great plot arcs. Here's a reading of one of the stories that one of my stories that has 250,000 views. So, let's take a look at this. Here is his author page on the SCP Foundation. Again, collections of short stories, a collaborative work effort. So a bunch of people are coming in to write these short stories, all sort of I would think in a similar continuity. But here is his video, SCP-3108, the nerfing. Object class safe transfiguration SCP. Again, I'll put this in the description so you guys can click on it. But this is a reading of one of the stories he wrote. And sounds like a pretty cool project. A bunch of people, creatives coming together to kind of create this like world, in a huge collaborative effort. Sounds really cool. So if that interests you, go ahead and check it out. And listen to this story by Modern Erasmus. Next one I want to show off comes from Ahmad Manga, I think. He says, hi all, I'm creator of Procrastination Simulator. It's a silly game that puts you in the shoes of an aspiring game developer who procrastinates a lot. I created it in 2015, but here's the definitive 2018 version. Okay, I'm pulling that up. So it's a interactive fiction, essentially. You go into this and it'll give you like a series of choices. Do you want to do this, this, or this? So kind of like choose your own adventure in a way. And you kind of click through and you can get different endings and stuff like that. Again, link will be in the description for Procrastination Simulator if you'd like to check that out. Okay, thank you for sending that in. Ahmad Manga. Okay. Next we have Riconius, who wanted to share some of his art with us. He did Kingdom Hearts 3 fan art here. Said he worked on it for a really long time. Pretty cool. But on top of this,
Nice.
I kind of pulled this from his Twitter. He's actually doing commissions for his art too. So you could get a sketch for $5, line art for $10, flats for 20, or full color. Cell shading for 30 and full render for $50 US. So if you're interested in having him do some art for you, want to do a commission, hit him up. Let's see. He's got his email here. Ricard, I'll just spell it out. RICARDOANTONIOART at gmail.com. So I think it's Ricardo Antonio Art at gmail.com.
Cool.
So hit him up if you want to do a commission, you want to do some art for you. Thanks for sending that in. Okay, this last one comes from Paul Metcalf. And this one is awesome. I'm really excited to show this to you guys. So he's creating a game called Tactics 5 Obsidian Brigade. It's a working title.
This looks cool.
This looks freaking sweet. Tactics 5 is a retro-style tactical turn-based RPG in homage to games like 1997's Final Fantasy Tactics from Square Enix. It's set in an in-house fantasy setting with lore and magic. Also uses techniques to convert to a 2D isometric look from 3D assets. So I'm going to mute it, but just sort of like full size here so you can see this. Very, very, very. You can see the inspirations from Final Fantasy Tactics kind of off the bat. But we don't see a lot of games being made like this anymore. Like there are still tactical games being made, XCOM and Fire Emblem, but I haven't seen one done in the style of Final Fantasy Tactics in quite a while. Maybe I'm just ignorant to the fact that maybe there's some great tactical games in this particular
Mario or Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle.
That's more like XCOM though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. It's not like this at all.
But
although there's a new game coming out that looks similar to Advance Wars for the Game Boy Advance,
nice.
but it's set in an older time period, I think. So
you see the screen transition there when it goes to give you your objectives is even similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, like the way that it kind of does that. So, anyways, this game looks really sweet. Let's see. I'll put the link in the description again to the connectunity.com link here where you can come and follow this. A link to his website as well will be in the description. But I'm excited to try this when it's actually done. Like to play
this looks cool.
I'm freaking stoked about it. So looks awesome. Thank you, Paul, for sharing that with us. Okay. I believe we have reached the end of our podcast for today, fellas.
I think so.
I will try to incorporate more Q&A next time because we've switched it now to where we're only going to cover one topic each week. Kason and I, instead of having each of us split and do a different one, we're each going to just do one topic.
And we'll each have our different approaches to it.
Yeah. So we'll take, I think next week I'll put out something on Patreon so that you guys can ask questions again. We're not going to go like super in depth into them like we did on the last, like our previous podcast. Where we make them into full-fleshed, like 30-minute topics or whatever. But we will still open up the opportunity for you guys to ask us questions on Patreon that we can answer on whatever you guys want us to talk about, since we're choosing the main topics now. So, all right, you guys are beasts. Thank you for watching. Kason's got a video coming out on Monday. It's going to be great, especially for those of you
who already saw it.
Well, for those of you who already saw it, I hope you watched it. If you didn't, go watch it. But if you want to learn a foreign language, if you're interested in learning a foreign language, you better be ready for this video. This video is going to teach you everything you need to know about how to learn a new language.
You will be fluent by the end of the video.
You'll be able to play Japanese games in Japanese.
Yep.
watch anime in Japanese by the end of Kaysen's video. So, high impact
Look forward
video.
to it.
All right, guys. We will talk to you again soon. Peace out.
Peace.
Thank you.